Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Housing and Homeless Forum. How did we get here? A while back, just brainstormed. Galen Mollick, I'm your Rice County Commissioner. So a while ago, I was storming with our administrator, Sarah Folstead, back here, and Susie, and Megan's here from Social Services. We did a presentation like this on mental health, and there were some series of things I wanted to bring before the citizens, because there's a lot of things that the county does that people aren't necessarily aware of what we do. If you don't use our services, you might not know what the county actually does, other than collect taxes and the landfill. And so with that, we came up with some ideas of some forms we could bring before the public. It was post-COVID mental health in Rice County. It was the housing and the homeless, and now we're going to do another one here at some point down the road. We're going to redo the mental health one, most likely, if I can get our friends with the Legal Women Voters to help us on that one and do it here as well. And then we're going to do one on community corrections, because a lot of people don't know what community corrections is, and it involves mental health, it involves all sorts of issues. So with that, I hope you enjoy tonight, you learned something tonight. We have a housing issue in Rice County, as every county in the United States does, and we have homeless issues in Rice County as the same as probably just about every county in Minnesota and the United States. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susie, our communications director for Rice County, and she will introduce everybody that's participating tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner Malika. As Commissioner Malika said, we're going to talk about housing and homelessness tonight. And one thing that he has said many times to me is that he's heard from a lot of folks who talk about how Rice County is the best kept secret. And we do provide a lot of services, including housing assistance through our housing department and through our social services department. So we'll have folks from both of those departments here tonight. Joy Watson is our housing director, and she will speak first. Then our housing assistance folks in social services, Carol Rist is supervisor for Caddy Housing and Human Choices, and Jerry Paschke is supervisor for financial services. Scott Wabada from Community Action Center is also here. He's the executive director. I don't know if everybody knows that we now have one, and they now have a location in Faribault as well. So they really have branched out and are helping even more people than ever. Laura Helly is the Housing Development Director for Three Rivers Community Action, and her colleagues, Randy Callahan, Director of Community Support Services, and Jeremy Emmel, is that correct? Close? Okay. He's Director of Asset Building and Energy Programs. And Kelly Pedracky is the Executive Director for the Northfield Union of Youth, and they have done a lot of great work with young people who are experiencing homelessness. So first, I'd like to welcome Joy Watson, our Rice County Housing Director. And, excuse me just a second, unfamiliar with my computer. Yeah, sorry, I lost it. Oh, the first one.
coming tonight. I don't know about everyone else, but I'm very happy to be at this time of year where it's still a little tiny bit light out at 6 o'clock. So to give us kind of some foundation of what we're talking about, we have here on the screen, and for those of you who might want to look at it more later, a printout with some information that comes from Minnesota Housing Partnership. They do a county profile each year, and this is the most recent one. So some of this information is somewhat outdated.
Can you just introduce yourself and give some
Oh, yes, okay. So I, as Susie said, am Joy Watson. I'm the Director of Housing for Rice County. And our department does all of the federally funded rental assistance programs that Rice County administers. So I'll talk a little bit about that more in detail, and then give some foundation of what we're doing today. So, and you'll just have to excuse me because this is very small and it's hard to see from here. But this is the most recent information on Rice County from Minnesota Housing Partnership. So it talks about the number of renter households in Rice County and the number of owner households. So about 25% of households in the county rent their homes, and the remainder and then it talks about cost burden. So you can see that there are a lot of households in the county that are cost burden, and what that means is they're paying more than 30% of their income for their rent and utilities. And the more cost burden the family is, the less money they have available for their other needs. And again, this is 2022 data, which is the most recent, but in 2022, we had 127 eviction filings in the county. The year before that, 119, and then if you'll recall, during COVID, there was an eviction moratorium, so then there were not evictions prior to that. So to talk a little bit about the definition of affordable housing, a family is considered cost burden if they're spending more than 30% of their income for rent. So affordable housing is just generally defined as housing which is less than 30% of your income, whatever that may be. So a lot of people conflate affordable housing with low-income housing. So everybody, though, in this room wants to have affordable housing. That's something that we all hope that we're not spending more than 30% of our income for rent and utilities together. So as we go through this evening, that's what we'll be talking about, is families not paying more than 30%. As we go through all of our presenters this evening, we'll be talking a little bit about a housing continuum. And so we have a graph here that kind of looks at what the various phases of housing are, starting with people who are experiencing homelessness, going into emergency shelter, transitional housing, community housing, affordable housing, affordable home ownership, market rental, and market home ownership. And what we would like to see on this continuum is people making a steady journey from one side to the next, but as you can see from the graph, and one of the things that we'll talk about tonight is that it's not a straight line. Many things can happen in a household's life that would cause them to go up or down. So one of the things that you would see is if someone has improved employment, maybe they're going to travel from rental housing to home ownership. If they connect with services and they're in emergency shelter, maybe they're going to move into a more stable form of housing. But as you can see also on the right-hand side, with market housing and market rental, if someone has an illness or a job loss, they could move all the way to the other side and end up experiencing homelessness. And so one of the things we'll talk about tonight is the various programs that are available to people as they travel up and down this continuum. And one of the other things that we talk about is people wanting to downsize. So we have a lot of people in our society that are not necessarily in the right size home. That are maybe in a larger home where they raise their kids are gone, 30 years ago, what you would have done was sell that home, take the proceeds of your home, and you would have spent that money to buy yourself something smaller. The way the real estate market is today, you would often have to get yourself into a mortgage as a retiree, and most people to try and avoid that because the housing market is such that those costs have gone up so much. So one of the things when we were preparing for this meeting tonight was to talk about how home prices have increased over the years. So back in 1985, you could expect to pay about 2.5% or 2.5 times your income for your housing. So if you made $100,000, you would expect that you would pay $250,000 for a home. That has almost doubled, and so our most recent numbers are 4.3 times. So a $100,000 income would be spending $430,000 for a home. And as we'll talk a little further into the presentation, those numbers don't really match up. That's not an affordable home for someone making that type of income. And so this information is from Joint Center for Housing Studies from Harvard, and you can see how those numbers, all through the 80s into the early 2000s, that ratio stayed pretty steady. So if your income went up, the cost of housing would go up at approximately the same rate. So you didn't see much of a shift. But then you can see mid-2000s when the housing crisis occurred, that shift happened. We had a dip at the end of the housing crisis, and now we're on, at the highest rate that we've been. And so one of the things, I'm just going to go back a slide here, and just ask, how many people in the room are homeowners? And of you, how many of you have been a homeowner for more than 20 years? How many of you have been a homeowner for more than 30 years? More than 40? More than 50? So, 50 years ago, you could confidently know that it would be less money for you to buy a home than it would be for you to rent. And so that was one of the things we talked about, is everybody has it in their mind that rent is like $500. And you just, that's a small piece of your income, you can save up, you're going to buy the house. That is not the path that is available to homeowners anymore. And so this information came from Workforce Development. They do a job board basically every week for jobs that are available in the county. And so if you look here, maintenance technician at a farm, $21 an hour. Warehouse associate, so someone working in manufacturing, $19 an hour. Cashier at Walmart, $14 to $27 an hour, which I assume is on the high side. Resident assistant in a nursing home, starting at $19 an hour. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about is with these jobs, we had pulled some current rental costs from Northfield just this week. So an average one bedroom in Northfield is $1,600 to rent a one bedroom apartment. And I would assume that many of you that are homeowners, if your home is not paid off, are probably spending less than this amount for a mortgage right now. And not for a one bedroom apartment. So to look at that, in order for it to be affordable, you need to make 3 times what the cost of that is. So for a one-bedroom apartment, you would need to be making $4,800 a month or $57,000 a year, which comes out to a little over $27 an hour to be able to afford a one-bedroom apartment. And as we saw from the previous slide, many jobs do not make that affordable. If you get to a 2-bedroom, that's $1,800, and in order to afford that, you need to be making $64,000 a year or $31 an hour. So if we flip back to that slide, there are very few jobs in the community that can afford even to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. And so that's one of the things that we'll talk about this evening. And then I'll talk a little more in general about what Rice County Housing Authority does. So at Rice County Housing Authority, our mission is to provide an adequate supply of safe and sanitary dwellings in order to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Rice County. So that's our main focus. So what we do at the Housing Authority, and everyone will talk a little bit about what their agency does, but for what we do at the county, our programs are long-term in nature. So we do not, out of our office, provide emergency assistance, shelter, anything like that. So our programs are long-term, so households can remain on our program for really as long as they're income eligible for those programs. And the other thing that we do not do, our office is providing the financial subsidy piece, but we're not doing case management. So that's something that other agencies in the county do. So they're helping people find housing, navigate housing, and maintain that stable housing. So for our programs, those are income-based, and in order to qualify, you have to make less than 50% of the area median. So for us, that's a family of 4 making less than about $50,000. And that assistance either is tenant-based, so it stays with the person, they get to pick where they live in a private market rental unit, or project-based, so like Spring Creek 2 townhomes here in Northfield is project-based, and that assistance is with that particular project. And then for our programs, we are limited on what rents people can charge. So a lot of the rents that you see, so an $1,800 rent for a 2-bedroom, the Department of Housing and Urban Development tells us the most people can spend for a 2-bedroom, rent and utilities together is $1,177. So because those market rents are often so high, it does make it difficult for people to find market rate rental units to lease. And then this is just a brief overview of the funding that we get. We do multiple different types of rental assistance, and some of those are specialized for people who have experienced homelessness or have been in foster care, people that are non-elderly or disabled. And then we also do have a program where you can use your rental assistance to purchase a home. And then other programs that we do at Rice County are economic development loans and other special housing types. So there are special Section 8 vouchers that are for veterans. And then we also recently have built a 22-unit home ownership neighborhood. So that is under construction right now. Or excuse me, the neighborhood is complete, but the homes are under construction in Fairfield. And that is all I have, Susie.
Thank you.
Sure you wanted the housing map is on the.
Oh, yes. So over here is a map of the Twin Oaks subdivision, if anyone has questions about that, and then there is more information about that on the Rice County website as well.
Is that in Faribault?
It is, right next to the, right adjacent to the new safety center.
Currently, we have funding for 6 5-bedroom, I always get that turned around, units, and then we just received funding for 8 more. So, yeah, and I think, how many can it be, is it 20, 22? Okay.
8 left.
All right, perfect, thank you.
And partnering with Habitat on that.
So, yeah, the first 6 were partnering with Habitat.
And 3 Rivers is the
And 3 Rivers, yeah, it's very important, sorry, y'all. Let me see. Yeah, I'm going to unfamiliar computer. Next, I'd like to invite Jerry Paschke and Carol Rist to come up. They are workforce social services, and they work with housing supports. I also want to introduce Megan Thomas, who is our adult services supervisor in our social services. She's here tonight. Thank you, Megan.
then this little piece of housing that will kind of explain a little bit to you guys right now.
Use your microphone. Thank you.
Wasn't I talking? So again, Carol Rist, I am the CCB waiver supervisor, which stands for CADI and brain injury waivers, which are funding sources to help people. And then our Men Choices unit, and then this little piece of housing.
And I'm Jerry Paschke. I'm supervisor for the Financial Assistance Unit. I'm one of 3 supervisors in that unit. We determine eligibility for public assistance programs. So food support, cash, healthcare, and one of the programs is housing support, which we're about to talk about right now. Where's our slide? So housing support, many of you may know this program as group residential housing. That was its former name until the state of Minnesota decided to change its name. And the reason it changed the name to housing support is the program no longer just deals with just group homes. The program has now expanded to cover apartments, to cover other types of residences, or what we call settings, for assistance. And the other thing I want to point out is it isn't just a place to live. It's also designed to provide other services. And you noticed on the continuum that Joy provided, it's to provide there are other things besides affordable rent that some people may need. And you can see some of the things that are listed up there. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There could be chemical dependency treatment. There could be assisted living for the elderly. There's a whole laundry list of things that are provided with housing support services. So it's more than just providing a place to live, although it is on the continuum, and it does contribute toward getting somebody into independent living and into affordable housing. So we're talking really about 4 types of settings or residences where people live to qualify for this assistance. So we're talking traditional group homes, assisted living, normally for the elderly, but not always. Supportive housing, which is a new concept in the last couple of years, and then long-term homelessness residences, and we have 2 of them now. One in Faribault, which is the Lofts, and then the other here in Northfield, which is Spring Creek 2. And the reason I point out that bottom bullet is we get applications, about 3 a week, where people are applying. Not only are they applying for cash, they're applying for food support, they're also applying for housing support, thinking they're getting rental assistance. We have to deny those because they're just not in the right place. And so if they're not in one of these 4 settings, we have to deny them, because that's really, again, not the intent of this program. The other thing that I'll mention, and I forgot to mention before, this is state-funded. This is state-funded program. So no county dollars are being used for this. This is all funded by the state of Minnesota, still with the Department of Human Resources. This did not get branched off to the Department of DCYF, Department of Children, Youth and Family. This is staying with the Department of Human Resources. But no county funds are being used. This is all state funded. How do you apply? We have a combined application form, which if you haven't applied for our programs, that's our big form that we use for cash and food support. Those who have applied, they're very familiar with this form. It's a kind of a catch-all form that allows you to apply for everything except for health care. And again, people apply for housing support on it, not knowing that, well, they can't have it because they're not in one of the 4 settings that we talked about. They can also apply on minbenefits.gov, which is an online application similar to what you've heard in MNsure for medical assistance and healthcare. There is an asset limit, $10,000. Very few of our people even get to that point. Very few people who are applying for housing support have assets. Some that do don't have very much. So that $10,000, we rarely see an issue with that. They do need to verify it at application, though. We can't just take their word for it. Income limits depend on type of units. There are certain units that have certain room and board amounts, and that's where the income limits come from. There are other requirements based on the case, and then that last bullet point is what I mentioned before. This is a state-run program. So I went back 3 years. I happen to have some data from 3 years ago in terms of what we have in Rice County in this area and what we have today. And this is what we had 3 years ago. A little bit of change in terms of number of residences, number of settings. There's a little bit of consolidation over the last 3 years, especially in assisted living. Long-term homelessness was pretty much brand new in January of 22. That's when the lofts opened up. They still have 8 units. Spring Creek 2 opened up later, and so that's that second unit that's now open. Spring Creek 2 has 10 of the units now of long-term homelessness, and supportive housing, like I said, is a brand new concept, and we have 4 settings with a total of 25 units in supportive housing. And then these are the people we're serving in this arena. I do want to caveat with assisted living. Those are people on assisted living that are also on medical assistance. That's not the total number of people in assisted living in Rice County. There are 4 more people that live in assisted living in Rice County. They just don't need the assistance. They're able to pay for their own room and board. They're able to pay for their own medical expenses. So what we're capturing with assisted living are those that are also on medical assistance. They may be on some sort of waiver program, elderly waiver. That number, as you can see, has gone down a little bit, somewhat due to consolidation, and also somewhat due to we have higher income people, more higher income people in the elderly recently. And you can see with supportive housing, 16 people are on support out of 17. That's actually a pending application. We do have people that we are serving that are living in facilities out of Rice County. And that has to do with the fact that we're providing the services here. And they just happen to be living elsewhere. So that's kind of where we're sitting here in Rice County. And at the end, if you have questions about any of this, feel free to ask one of us. Thank you.
so much. Next, we have Three Rivers, and we have Laura Helly and Randy Callahan and, remind me, Jeremy, and Amy. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Laura Helly. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Housing Development Director for Three Rivers Community Action. We are supposed to tell you everything we're doing in housing and homelessness in a very short amount of time. So I'm going to speak very quickly, and I promise I'll hang around afterwards for questions. Thank you for inviting us here tonight. In case you have never heard of Three Rivers Community Action, we're a nonprofit established in 1966. We have been bridging families out of poverty into self-sufficiency since then. Our core service areas are Rice, Goodhue, Olmsted, and Wabasha counties, and some of our work extends throughout southeast Minnesota and even beyond. Here's just a quick graphic of our the services we do provide in Rice County. We have offices in Faribault and Northfield. We have housing projects also in Lonsdale. We do Meals on Wheels, Hiawatha Land Transit, and Head Start. So affordable housing, this is really my bailiwick. We have been building and rehabilitating housing in Rice County for 27 years. Currently, we own 164 places to live in Rice County. Most of those are multifamily, with a few single-family homes as well. We have two projects in process in Rice County. They both happen to be in Faribault. One is Robinwood Manor. We're partnering with the Faribault Housing Redevelopment Authority to acquire and renovate Robinwood Manor, and that will happen later this year. That's 52 units of senior housing. And then Twin Oaks, which Joy did mention. So that's essentially a new neighborhood of single-family homes for people with larger families that need those bigger bedroom counts. And the Rice County HRA, Habitat for Humanity, and Three Rivers work together, secured funding from the Impact Fund at Minnesota Housing. So I think she mentioned there were 6 that were started in 2024. There's another 8 funded for 2025, and then there's room for 8 more. So hopefully up to 22. And then I will do the bragging because Joy didn't do it, but Rice County HRA is actually pioneering the use of vouchers for home ownership. So there are HRAs all over the country who call Joy and say, how do you do this? How does it work? Because it's a really great idea. So Joy's obviously the basic presentations, the statistics show we need more housing. We know the demand is there. So why don't we just build more? Well, the reality is the construction costs are very high. It's difficult to build any new structure for less than $500,000. And that's about double what an average Rice County household can afford. So at Three Rivers, we deal with that by seeking state and federal funding to subsidize construction. About 1 in 5 projects that are proposed for new affordable housing get funded every year in Minnesota. So it's a very high bar to try to get a funding package from the state, and it's virtually impossible to build anything without those state and federal supports. We also focus on preserving existing housing. We can acquire and renovate existing apartment buildings. That's what we're going to do with Robinwood and Faribault. That typically costs more like $100,000 per unit, and an owner who did that would need to charge $1,500 a month rent just to pay the mortgage. At Three Rivers, we again use the state and federal rent subsidies to help bridge that rent gap. And we also use weatherization as a key strategy to keep our existing homes livable and affordable. And you'll hear more about weatherization later. I also should say, in case you can't read my disclaimer, it's kind of small, these are literally just back of the napkin math. I'm not talking about any specific project. I just wanted to give you the general sense of the ballpark we're playing in. Joy went over this a little bit as well, but I think it's really instructive. Rice County is actually a leader in the state for adding jobs. You've been adding jobs and are projected to continue adding jobs. But some of the most in-demand jobs are not at the high wage levels. So here's 5 of the most in-demand jobs coming from the Minnesota DEED statistics last week. Home health aide, nurse, truck driver, fast food counter worker, stock or order filler. And the orange line is your median household income. So this is where preservation of existing housing really becomes important, because the blue lines are what you're going to pay for rent of an existing apartment building. 4 of our 5 workers can pay for that 1 bedroom in an existing building, but only the nurse can pay for a 3-bedroom rent in a brand new building. That's why that preservation strategy is really important. And then, in homeownership, the picture gets even worse. We know homeownership is so important for building wealth, but no one among the 5 most in-demand jobs can afford a brand new house in Rice County. Only the nurse would qualify for your 2024 median sale price. So this is the actual of all the homes sold in Rice County in 2024. The median price was $327,000. Only a nurse at that $100,000 income level could afford that. Your truck driver that's at a $60,000 a year salary might be able to squeak it out at a $225,000 home, but I looked, there was exactly 7 homes in the whole county for sale at that price point, and none of them are in Northfield. And who will you be competing with? All of those other cost-burdened households who are trying to move into homeownership. So the trends that we're seeing in affordable housing in Rice County, we are seeing high demand and low vacancy. Among the properties that we own, our 2024 vacancy rate was 1.3%. 2 of our 7 properties in Rice County had no vacancies in 2024. We're also seeing families with large back rent debts. Back rent really exploded with COVID. And so instead of owing a couple months rents to your previous landlord, you come in with 6 months or more of a debt following you around, and it can be a real barrier for moving into new housing. And then we also are seeing the need for the 3+ bedroom units, the larger families and multi-generational families. I'm also going to cover our housing advocacy piece in place of Randy Callahan. She had an emergency tonight and couldn't join us. But in housing advocacy, 3 Rivers does prevention, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing. And so those were some of the things you saw on the left side of the housing continuum. They were in the red and orange and yellow. We have advocates who I like to think of as caseworkers. They walk alongside households experiencing a housing crisis to provide a person-centered, strengths-based approach to stability. The trends that we're seeing is pre-COVID, we had many more sort of one-time emergent situations. For example, we had an unexpected car repair and we need to fix the car to keep going to work, and so we got behind on the rent, and can you help us make it up? We'd see again that 1 to 2 months of rent, back rent debt. Post-COVID, we are seeing 2 to 6 months of back rent debt. We're seeing the need for more ongoing supports. Our experience in the community is that it's the lingering mental health and social isolation impacts of the pandemic. Households got used to not leaving the house or have a mental health challenge that just grew out of control during the pandemic, and working has become impossible. It's all kinds of things like that. We also want to say that in the history of homelessness prevention, taking a family that's on the edge and is about to get evicted, there has always been way more households in need than the funding will cover. And when the pandemic hit in 21, 22, we got a lot of extra funding to help those people. And even then, with funding like tripled from the baseline in the year before, there was still more demand for services. There were still more families that we couldn't help. Permanent supportive housing. So Jerry mentioned this when he was talking about housing support. One of the settings where you can get housing support from the county is permanent supportive housing. And what does that mean? Well, one thing it means is it's permanent. So there's no time clock of you have to get your life together in a year and then you're out of here. It's permanent for as long as you need it. It's also, there are supportive services tied to the housing. So you have an advocate who works with you. It's very much customized and tailored to what it is that you need. It's not that we give everybody financial and budgeting coaching. We give that to the folks that need it. Maybe it's mental health supports, maybe it's substance use, maybe it's helping them apply for other benefits like SNAP, just food stamps, those kinds of things. So it assists those individuals and families who are coming out of homelessness or chronic homelessness. You also heard long-term homelessness. We have a lot of acronyms and initials to describe homelessness, but you don't need to worry about those things. Essentially, if you don't have a place to live, you're homeless, and we use a lot of definitions to determine who gets the benefits, but they don't mean too much outside of our little world. And our permanent supportive housing really follows the housing first model. And the idea of housing first is that a person in crisis is first housed and then asked to move forward on areas of their life that might need work, such as sobriety, such as getting a job, finishing school, any of those things. This is a movement that's been going for about 20 years. It's very evidence-based, that it works long-term if you use housing that has those supportive services. If you say housing first and just here's the keys, see you later, good luck, you don't have the same outcomes. But I think I struggled with whether to even include this slide because when I think of the worst times in my life when I was most in crisis, if I would have had to dig out of those times while also living out of my car or sleeping in a tent or in a shelter, of course that doesn't work. Of course you need the stability of housing, safe housing, and a chance to be at peace and rest before you can work on the rest of your life. So that's the end of my piece, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jeremy Henry.
Great, so I'm Jeremy. If you remember Joy's slide where she had the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet kind of, our Achieve Homeownership program sort of works in the blue and the violet, I suppose it would be kind of affordable homeownership and market rate homeownership as well. So last year, we served 72 Rice County households with one-on-one advising, which is where we meet only with the members of the household, really helping them through understanding the homeownership process, finance piece, understanding laws and rules and regulations and how to work with the realtor, all those things. Home buyer education, where we give an 8-hour class that's called Home Stretch class. We invite lenders, realtors, sometimes insurance agents to kind of teach parts of this course to just introduce people to the process of home buying, and then home buyer savings programs, which I'll talk about later here. So what do our households face when they come to us? We don't have a specific income level that we can or can't work with, but usually folks are somewhere at 100% of their median income or less. They have often language barriers. They're building credit for the very first time. Sometimes they'll have a credit score of 0. They're navigating the U.S. banking system often, which can be very different from the places they came from. They're working to access down payment assistance programs for the first time. They have income challenges, of course. Often they'll need 2 years of W-2s just to be able to prove income, so they have to wait quite a bit of time before they're able to really approach home buying as far as actually looking at homes. They're building savings. Many of them, there's the emotional barrier of thinking that purchasing a home is not an option. If nobody in your network, nobody in your family, none of your friends, nobody in your community has owned a home, then you may not think that it's an option to own a home either. And then often in Rice County, you find folks are looking for homes that are large enough for their family, which often is at the 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom, or larger level, and it's a lot harder to find an affordable home once you get really past 2 or 3 bedrooms. So another thing that we do here, and really the entire founding of this program in 2008 was based on closing the gap, the racial gap in home ownership in Minnesota. So you can see here, the red line is white home ownership, which has hovered right around 77–76% for the last 14 or 15 years. Asian, then Latino is blue, Native American green, and Black or African American, the black line. You can see just in the last couple of years, there has been a little bit of progress, a little bit of uptick, but that we have one of the largest gaps in the country. And I think a lot of folks are familiar with that, but we have a lot of work to do. There's almost a 40–50% gap, depending on the year, between white folks and folks of color who are trying to buy homes here in Minnesota. Trends in home ownership, as we know, right, there are few affordable homes on the market. Higher interest rates, the rates have gone up, and while historically they're not as high as they were, say, in the late 70s or early 80s, they're still quite a bit higher than they've been for the last 20 years. We have larger families and multi-generational family units, so the housing stock isn't quite meeting the demand of folks. And then a new positive trend is the first-generation community down payment assistance program. That program came out last May, June, so it's been out almost a year this summer. It was created through legislation that put $100 million, made that available for folks who have never owned a home and whose parents have never owned a home. And there are some other things that, for example, if you've lost your home to foreclosure more than 3 years ago, that you can still qualify. But essentially, it's looking to help empower people who have never owned a home and haven't had a multi-generational history of home ownership in their family afford home ownership. And so that is still open. There's about $60 million still left in that fund. And it can give folks up to $32,000, 10% of the purchase price, and that's forgivable, totally forgivable over 5 years, which is a relatively short amount of time. And then Laura mentioned weatherization. So since 1980, we've weatherized and replaced weatherized home and replaced furnaces and water heaters for over 3,200 Rice County homes. We've completed work in essentially all of the cities and towns and townships in the county. Last year we did weatherize 22 homes, and we say we preserved them because essentially a lot of these homes that we work on are very, very leaky, very drafty. So what we usually do is come in, we'll do an energy audit, we'll add insulation, we'll seal the envelope of the home, and then we can also do things like replace furnaces, water heaters, and install LED lighting and other energy-saving appliances.
And that's income-based?
That is income-based, yep. That's 200% of the federal poverty level. We have some new projects in Rice County, so in weatherization, for the first time, we have a new window replacement program that comes in through the Federal Department of Energy and then through the State Department of Commerce. In the past, windows have not been replaced simply because they're incredibly expensive, and so the energy benefit of replacing windows compared to the cost is is pretty hard to justify in some ways, but this new program essentially gets very high quality windows, essentially the equivalent of triple pane windows in these new projects. Pre-weatherization, which is often we come into a house and the home just structurally is not sound enough to weatherize. So in the past, we would have to defer it or essentially decline weatherizing. And so now we can come in, if there's a leaky roof, for example, we can replace that roof before we start the weatherization. And then working with Healthy Communities Initiative and their Growing Up Healthy project, we are just probably in a week or two moving their mobile home rehabilitation initiative pilot from Healthy Communities to Three Rivers. And so that was a pilot that's been going for about 2 or 3 years with Growing Up Healthy and HCI. Focuses on mobile homes in Lewis County that have children that live there for either permanently or at least a significant amount of time. And so our hope is to keep that pilot going and eventually expand it to include, for example, homes that might have seniors without children and that sort of thing, and maybe in other areas outside of Lewis County as well. And I believe that is it.
Thank you so much. Next is Scott Wapata with Community Action Center.
All right, you can hear me. So I'll get started while we hook up the tech. Scott Wapata from Community Action Center. As mentioned previously, we're both in Northfield and in Faribault. We've been in Northfield for 50 plus years. How about after 50 you don't have to count anymore? And we've been in Faribault for, I don't know, 2 to 4 years, depending on kind of when you start the launch. But I have a lot of information, kind of like Laura, so I'm going to kind of cruise through it, because part of it is we're all trying to explain our own little niche, and yet we all overlap in the best ways in trying to figure this out, so making sure we're all on the same page. But don't at all. I would invite you to interrupt me and ask questions. I don't know if that's really the format, but please, you're welcome to. This is our mission. I think most people, can I get a quick show of hands? How many people just know generally about CAC, and I think get some general overview? Great. If you don't know, and I skip it, ask your neighbor. Okay, so CAC, one thing we've kind of re-explained in the last few years, and you'll see part of our growth, is that we often talk about like the center of community action as this like real heavy focus from us on community engagement. So we're not just a social service or human service provider or agency. We have a lot of programs that are community-based, all run by volunteers, and we just support them. Or we have new ideas that come from community members. Or even in our growth cycle, we'll talk a little bit more about this, a lot of our programs have actually shifted to being led by or informed by or kind of hired by our participants or clients who access the services of CAC. So this is just a good image. When I grew up, I had an image of a food shelf going into a dusty, dead spider like church basement and trying to get like a can of like expired canned asparagus. That was my memory. And it comes with all the shame and stigma of like, why would anybody want to access that? So this picture on the right is just a good example of what does a food shelf at CAC look like. And this isn't just us, there's kind of a movement throughout food shelves across at least Minnesota, kind of really thinking of it as a place that's honoring, there's respect, there's a lot of dignity, it feels empowering, it's abundantly sourced with fresh and local produce and fruits and vegetables. And so that image on the right is really, if you've never been in a food shelf and you're imagining my dead spider written church basement image, you're wrong, so am I, and this is what our food shelves look like. This is specifically our newer food shelf in Faribault. On the left is Hillcrest Village, I'll talk more about that later, but I think the big thing for me is that one thing that happens in like a housing summit is we're all like desperately hoping for clarity, And we've already heard like 8,000 acronyms, and we've all lost clarity already. And yet, even like the housing continuum, I just love that Joy started with that, because it gives us this sense of like a linear track. That's great for conversation, but it is just an absolute explosion after that. And it's non-linear, it's cyclical, it just keeps kind of going around, there's too many acronyms, and it's just not quite this linear narrative, and I want to make sure we honor that and try to come back to that at the end. But for CAC, we think a lot about that non-linear reality in terms of our work to provide food, employment services, clothing, transportation, community empowerment, community organizing. Like, we do a lot of things, and so I think about this example is our advocacy council. So it's made up of people who have long-term kind of access services at CAC. And our thought is, okay, well, if our goal was a program and we wanted to jam as many calories per person through our food shelf into the hands of people, that would be a like understandable transactional kind of relationship. Instead, this is our advocacy council, and they were really interested in understanding how CAC sources food, but also how like local community supported agriculture, CSAs, like engage in the community. And so these are our participants and their families, and they wanted access to go and learn about a local CSA. So they're at Springland Farm here, you see the owners, Betsy and Andrew on the left. Everybody's out there, and just to learn, how do CSAs work? Why is this something that's relevant to me? And again, not because we have a CSA education program, we don't. We just really listen to what people are interested in and our participants, and it goes from there. And the CSA has changed a lot about what they grow, what they source. We've kind of built a scholarship opportunity for local CSAs to give memberships out to families in our food shelf. This is a quick just image. So like 2018, CAC used to serve about 12% of the local Northfield population. Let's say that's like, I don't know, 2,500 people. We didn't serve anybody else, really. In terms of people who come to access CAC now, this is a little bit at the end of last year, but we're at about 30% in Northfield, a little bit more in Faribault. If you extrapolate that to the county, it's about 25%. So we used to serve about 2,500 people. That number has shifted to about 15,000, and actually more recently trending up to well above 16,000 unique individuals that live in our county. Almost like 98% is the Northfield and Faribault kind of micro communities. That's a big like growth of people. And I think what I don't want to like just skip over is what does that mean, and how do we think about CAC's role in identifying and supporting and resourcing like emerging immediate short-term needs. But when you get to 35 to 40% of the population, there's like an opportunity from like real empowerment, community organizing. I mean, I'm not going to use the word union, but there's this opportunity to collectively think different as a community because we have a shared identity of people who are actually in a singular geographic address and location, who have a shared identity, similar challenges, and instead of experiencing those things in isolation, there's a really strong component of experiencing them in community, both around peers and around people like staff at CAC and other partners who are at CAC's locations in terms of providing resources in that same space. I mean, I won't go into elections and politics, but I will go to like voting. Like 35 to 36+% of the population rarely votes, period, yet alone like votes as singular or has a shared identity. And just thinking about what that scale of shared identity might mean is something that I think is really exciting for the future and how we build a healthy community. Okay, so we reviewed these numbers. Joy said hers were too small, so I made them bigger. This is really just like now I'm going to zoom into housing for a second, even though, again, very rarely are people food insecure, but their housing is totally fine, right? That doesn't happen. And so I don't like this like housing silo because everything comes with it, but we're going to do housing again for this false sense of clarity. We're going to talk like renters are really where we see a lot of work, but again, that idea that of renters in Rice County, 45% of renters are cost burdened. As in, they're paying so much for housing costs that it puts the rest of their budget in jeopardy. And so they're really vulnerable to a change in income, a job loss, a healthcare issue, a healthcare expense, a car repair, needing to care for a family member or friend. Anything that kind of shakes the budget equation will perhaps, they're more vulnerable to having a really serious repercussion from that moment. And then you look at, I mean, in a homeowner perspective, it may be a smaller number, but the risk of losing your home, your asset that we've been talking about of building generational wealth. You're looking at 19+% of people are in that category of their budget stretched so thin that their asset, their wealth building asset is at risk from any kind of instability in kind of daily income in life and other challenges that come up. The severely cost burden is just like a micro part of the renters piece, but that's really looking at, these are people who are paying 50% plus of their income towards housing, and so really from CAC's perspective, when I'm trying to model, what is it we need to figure out how to resource, that's a really key number for me because it is extremely likely all of them are going to have enough instability in a year that they're going to need support from CAC. Okay, so this is our growth in terms of just eviction prevention. So this is like when CAC steps in for a family that's come to us and said, I'm behind on rent, or the example I think Laura shared, like a family who has a car repair and now is at risk of, they have to fix their car, they don't want to lose housing. And so this growth is from 2018. You see the spike during COVID. Yeah, we won't talk about that, that was a stressful year, but you still see, even after that, this gigantic growth pattern. And so from our perspective, we've been trying to secure more resources. I want to be clear that this is not a graph that everybody's needs have blown through the roof. I think Laura said it really well. There's actually always been a lot of unmet needs and challenges. And so CAC is just, to be honest, I think we're just doing a better job reflecting the needs of the community. And there are changes in the demographics that are stacking on top of that changed programming, but this is our work to really bring resources into Northfield and Faribault, into Rice County, and how we think about it. And on the other hand, I'll just say it's overwhelming to think that we're providing 1 year of rental assistance every month. And so I think one of the narratives that's really hard, like I'll just say CAC sometimes, we have that moment where we do have to say no, and we truly can never do enough. Right? We run these drop-in resource centers where families can come and ask for help, and yet we do have a limit. And we've done the best we can to make sure we're continuing to grow and reflect the needs of the community. And so here's that moment where I want to talk about how CAC uses these short-term things to think about how we change systems, because those short-term, needs-based, data-driven interventions help us understand maybe a systemic solution. And so one thing that happens when you have this type of escalation is we started asking this question about housing, and it's just really succinctly put around how long do we help pay for housing that people can't afford before we build housing that people can afford. And there is, if you want to be a business person perspective about it, you can look at ROI, how are you efficiently using your resources at some level, like you can build housing people can afford, you don't need to do this as much. And if you're looking at trying to run a capital campaign to build something, $500,000 goes a long way. And so how do you use these resources to really thoughtfully and efficiently help people in a short-term moment that do need it, and help lower the amount of people who need something in the short term because they have housing that's affordable. And so here's some quick examples of the way CAC's thought about our new kind of emerging role as a housing developer. Most of you have heard of Hillcrest Village. This is a picture complete with our shiny new solar array in the upper right corner. That is a separate story, and you owe me a beer or coffee afterwards if you want to hear it. The information's there. I think what we've really championed is this idea of stitching in emergency housing into the fabric of a neighborhood. So CAC's program model, we do not build like a barracks on the side of edge of town and say all people experiencing homelessness can stack in bunk beds there. We actually really thoughtfully try to stitch these emergency housing units into community. And so some of these units, you don't know which ones, I don't even really know which ones because they change, are positioned where a handful of units are available for people who are experiencing homelessness as a safe landing place on a short-term basis to get on their feet and kind of look at how do we get back to housing. And this is based on a housing first principle that Laura talked about. We also have other units scattered around town, but the idea is that we built like this neighborhood at Hillcrest where the financials, the income from the rentals actually pay the subsidy for the emergency housing. And so on a permanent, non-subsidy need basis, we actually have emergency housing available in our community without having to constantly be thrown at the whims of changing federal legislation around grants or changing state legislation around grants. Instead, it's actually built into a sustainable financial model. Similarly, one of the things that I will say, and I won't go down this rabbit hole, CAC is committed to building essentially national leading energy efficient new construction. We're trying really hard to meet passive house designs. We want to talk about what that looks like, but really what we've been able to certify is a net zero energy housing development. So Hillcrest is completely electric, there is no gas on site, and 100% of all heat and all electricity is sourced from the on-site solar. There's nothing that's non-renewable at Hillcrest. And we actually have continued to work at this to see how close we can get the cost down in terms of that delta for really prioritizing environmental standards, to where this will pay off the extra cost in about 4 years. And after that, the environmental additions actually make more revenue for the project. And we do that because utilities are, this is a complicated graph, but on the left, that 54 number, you don't have to know what a kBTU per square foot per year is, but you can just see on the stack on the left, that's like a brand new house if you built that code, kind of an image of how much energy it needs. On the right is our kind of hybrid version, and we have a 62% reduction. Again, not compared to like an old drafty house, but actually compared to a brand new home that would be built today by a builder in the county. That reduction in energy use is a reduction in cost, which is a reduction in operating costs. And so our theory that we're proving out is that by building it sustainable, we're actually ensuring it's affordable. Kind of back to this non-linear path. This is Mia Rocha, who's part of our advocacy council. This is Mia actually accepting a Climate Justice Leadership Award from Mark Seeley, who's a climatologist. The CAC has been recognized for really, again, I said we prioritize this community engagement approach. We're not just building things, and we're not just a developer. We're really interested in our advocacy council, actually, who again are made up from participants at CAC, actually wrote the rent-up process for Hillcrest and actually helped select tenants, and we've gone through that work kind of in different iterations. Again, CAC, actually all of our staff are hired by our participants. We turn a lot of power over to our community members who access resources at CAC as our kind of systemic way to continue reflecting the needs of the community. Okay, I'll rifle through these. This is a project I'm really excited about. We'll be breaking ground in Faribault. If you're from Northfield, you could just shorten this, that this is like a half of a Hillcrest. If you're not from Northfield or don't know about Hillcrest, in short, it's the same idea that it'll be this net zero energy housing development, and it, again, will have 2 units of emergency housing stitched together with 6 other workforce housing units. So it'll be an 8-unit development at the intersection of 1st Street and 1st Avenue Northwest in Faribault, which is like a block north of the Faribault Library. And we're really close to finalizing the financing on this with our hope to break ground around June 1st. A really exciting project. This is a new attempt from us to think about how we don't just do things in a nonprofit bubble. This is our attempt to partner with both the city of Northfield and Rebound partners on redeveloping that corner intersection at Division Street and Woodley in Northfield. This is kind of the southwest corner. It's that kind of white house that has a weird kind of ranch across from, I don't even know how to explain it. This is a redesign. Our approach here is to say, okay, here's a project that just honestly isn't penciling out and is a blighted part of our downtown district, and how can CAC bring in some resources to make it 2 things. 1, more affordable, and 2, energy efficient. And so what we did is we took a heavily for-profit idea that just, to be honest, couldn't quite pencil out, and we were able to seek grants and bring in grant funds to build a partnership model that will actually, again, shift this from just another housing build to something that's affordable at a workforce rate. It's not going to be subsidized, but the rents will be, they're much more appropriate based on our input. And then our hope is to push a market player in terms of a private entity to build a net zero energy housing project as a way to continue to try to get that environmental approach, not just something done from the nonprofit perspective, but actually done and experienced in the market. Okay, hard pivot. So that's housing. Now I'm going to talk about homelessness, which is like, just, I'm going to rifle through this because I want to make sure we all have plenty of time to hear from Kelly. This is part of that continuum that CAC is doing all this systems work, and we just can't catch everyone, right? And so there are times when a family, an individual, a youth, parents, elderly end up not having a place to stay tonight. And so this is a graph, it's a map, it's a little old, it's 2021 data, I'll talk about that in a second, but essentially this is kind of rural counties in southern Minnesota. Rice County is at 222 individuals in Rice County experiencing homelessness. Kind of if you disaggregate the data a little bit, but from just demographics perspective, 90% of those are families with children, 4% are youth, as in like a youth-headed household with children, and then otherwise 6% is unaccompanied youth. This is a few years old. Actually, the newer numbers, which aren't presented in the same way, pushes this to, I think last year there was well over 200 students alone, not including adults and other individuals, but well over 200 students in Northfield and Faribault Public Schools experiencing homelessness, which is a lot of kids. So CAC's priority has been to focus on that 90% of individuals, and so we really, really try hard to prioritize families with children, which again, if you think about our model, we're trying to stitch in our emergency housing into neighborhoods that are functioning like neighborhoods. We all say it takes a village. This is what it takes a village looks like when you're a social service provider trying to prevent or address homelessness. And so we really, our units look like 1 and 2 and 3 bedroom rentals, homes, apartments, kind of various things, and you can't tell what they are, but that's where we prioritize kind of multi-bedroom so that we can support families with children, and really have kind of grown what that looks like. Kelly Draco will talk a little bit about that unaccompanied youth component in a little bit. Our side of it is really looking at, we have both hotels and shelters. We have currently operating 6 to 8 like shelters, as in we either built them or own them or occupy them in some way, as in they're permanent and they are stitched into the community. Because of constant overflow and changes in terms of populations of people who might need access to emergency housing, we also use hotels quite a bit as that stopgap when there's a life safety issue or when our shelters are full, which when there's no affordable housing, our shelters are always full. If you want to, our irony is we keep a pretty robust waiting list for emergency shelter. I don't really understand that sentence because a waiting list is awkward and it's an emergency, but it's something we do, and it's one of the reasons, again, we're always thinking, how do we do this more effectively? Last year, we had about 580 hotel nights that we paid for. Question, Beck?
Can you go back real quick? How proportional are the populations of Rice and Steele County compared to the other counties? Which is to say, is the blue sort of per capita, or do we actually have a higher proportion of our citizens needing or experiencing homelessness?
I don't have the data in front of me enough to answer your question well, but anecdotally, you're onto something, that there's a percentage kind of normalization in that, and yet my understanding, and Jenny, I don't know if you have any insights here, but my understanding is Rice County is still high on a percentage basis and high from a raw number basis, but the percentage is a lot less stark than the raw number. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That was a good question. Everybody asked questions like she did. So 2,100 shelter nights, so those are in our shelters that we again own, run, operate. And again, it's about 448, 450 households. A very sizable portion of that are children. And again, that's our priority. So these are children in our schools. Again, I know there's over 200, and so we haven't gotten to everyone. I will say 3-4 years ago, that number was 10. So I'm proud of growing it by at least 10 to 15x. And yet we have work to do. And so that's especially our side of it, from working with children, working with families. And I think the one thing I just kind of want to close with is that we can very easily think about this and end all of this with just money conversation, right? Like, if we just had units that were more affordable and we gave people, I mean, to some extent, if the problem is so simple that we can solve it with money, I get a little bit worried that we're not understanding the complexity of the problem. Is that fair? And I want to just recognize one thing we've learned, and I'll say I personally have kind of been drug over the mat on learning myself and been humbled many times, is how complicated trauma can be. And especially in this non-linear work, I know for CAC we are not a domestic violence provider, and yet at some point we paused and looked at who was staying in our shelters. And from women who were staying in our emergency shelters, 60 to 70% of them were actively fleeing domestic violence or had experienced and were survivors of sexual assault. So then we had to ask the question, are we a domestic violence provider? You can wrap things in programs all you want. We're having a housing summit today. We could have a domestic violence, sexual assault summit, and a lot of the data would start pulling together. We could have survival, sex, sexual exploitation conversation, especially with youth. We could talk about substance use disorder and that intersection with housing and homelessness. And we really like the narrative and we're more comfortable with it, that like unaddressed mental health issues or unaddressed substance use disorder, like that leads to homelessness. I just want us all to stop and recognize how cyclical it becomes, that homelessness also leads to substance use disorder and mental health challenges, and that it is not a one-way street, and we often want to blame the person in this process that, well, they're an addict. Well, they might have taken on an addiction as part of a self-medicating way to handle the fact that they're sleeping under a bridge last night, and that might be an appropriate self-care option for them, but we put them in that position because we don't have a system that provides affordable housing, and we don't have enough resources to really step in and stop that cycle. And so there's a lot of narratives that come from it's people making bad decisions that lead this way, or yeah, they're precarious and the mistake gets them there, but there's also just this really long arc that youth who are homeless overwhelmingly have seen violence in their homes when they were younger, and they've seen or been the victims of sexual assault in some capacity. They've experienced homelessness when they were younger children. And so part of our focus on working with families with children is that it's going to take generations of stable housing to provide a space for healing, to stop the slide back from homelessness back to all the trauma that comes with it. And we really have to be thoughtful about it is not a one-way order, and we have to recognize the cyclical nature of it and the reality of that means we kind of need to step in now if we want to see a healthy community, even in 2 generations. And it's not going to step in today and what does it look like on the data side in 12 months. Our arc is really long. And I just want to make sure we hold the complexity while we also selfishly seek simplicity and clarity in the conversation today. So I will end there, and I'll turn it over to Susie and Coach.
Get reconnected here. We got disconnected from the Zoom. Kelly Podracki is the executive director of the Northfield Union of Youth, and they've done a lot of really interesting work and great work for our young adults. Is it 18 to 24? Is that generally?
Housing 16 to 24.
Housing 16 to 24. I apologize. Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Scott is a challenging person to follow, so bear with me. I'm Kelly Podracki. I'm the Executive Director of Northfield Union of Youth. Today I'm honing in on youth homelessness, understanding the issues and what we're currently doing to respond to them. Our mission at NUI is to provide power and voice to youth and to create a caring and enriching community. Most of y'all know NUI as the key. It's celebrated as the nation's longest running youth-led youth center. We operate 365 days a year, offering a safe space, food access, and essential services. I highlight this because we're the first line of defense. A lot of times, statistics don't actually show real numbers, and an unaccompanied youth needs a trusted adult to share their story, to access resources. NUI's housing support includes the Wallflower Project, the Wallflower House, which is new this year, and emergency shelter. The Wallflower Project is a volunteer host home network that serves as a resource for youth ages 16 to 24 who are facing homelessness. So these are people in our community that have opened their homes to youth needing safe space. Emergency shelter is a case-by-case basis for people that need shelter tonight. And then we have the Wallflower House. It's a transitional home that's offering longer-term accommodations with supportive services to promote independence and self-sustainability. It's located in downtown Northfield, just down the street from the Keep, and it's for young people ages 18 to 24. It's a substance-free space with case management, weekly life skills, and goal setting. And I'm actually going to share a video of the ribbon cutting, which happened just a couple weeks ago. It was such a community effort, and I want to celebrate that. Awesome. Nope. Where's the tech support? If we can't get the video to play, we can move on. Go. Thank you. Appreciate it. The city of Northfield actually put this together for us.
The Wallflower House, a transitional home for Bryce County youth ages 18 to 24. It's a housing initiative for Northfield Union of Youth. We're so excited to have the community come out and everyone that's helped make this project happen. It's going to serve youth ages 18 to 24. It's a transitional home, so it's to help youth transition to a life of self-sustainability and independence. But really, who does it serve? It serves a kid that's been couch surfing and needs a safe place to stay. It serves someone coming out of substance use treatment that just needs that true transition to get on their feet. It serves the person escaping a domestic abuse situation. We have a youth moving in on Saturday, and they've been in our Wallflower Project, so they're taking that next step to independence. So it serves a variety of people in circumstances. But technical answer is 18 to 24-year-olds. Wallflower Project has been around for over a decade, so we've always had our foot in housing, thanks to Scott Waffa and the youth at that time. I came on board a year and a half ago and had the thought of, a house. But the organization needed to be stabilized first, and really thanks to Jeff McLaughlin with the community coming forward in May, partnering with us. So really since May, less than a year, really. Look at the community, look at Northfield, look at how they showed up for the youth. Look what collective power does. Look what everybody doing something does. I think it's just showing community, and it's showing people showing up for the most vulnerable, and it's showing in times such as these how there are actionable items that can happen that can really help.
I'm just so grateful for the Northfield community and everyone that showed up to make the Wallflower House possible. So how do we find youth homelessness? I think Three Rivers talked about these different categories earlier. I don't need to get into each one, but the head definition is really you're lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. We get our ages for youth 16 to 24 from this category 3, unaccompanied youth under 25 years of age. It talks, category 2 is about imminent homelessness, that it's getting ready to happen within 14 days, people escaping sexual assault, as Scott mentioned, dating violence, people that are living in their cars, that are couch surfing, that are staying in hotels. So some statistics in Minnesota, statewide data. I do have QR codes, actually I have one on this other slide too. So if you want to dig into any of the data, you want to look at it further, figure out where I got it from, you can scan the QR codes with your phone and it will pull up. So So on a single night in 2023, 1,315 unaccompanied youth ages 24 and younger experienced homelessness in Minnesota. Together, children and youth ages 24 and younger account for 4 out of every 10 people experiencing homelessness. There is a demographic disparity. Youth of color are disproportionately affected. 73% of homeless youth identifying as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, despite comprising only 26% of Minnesota's youth population, are experiencing homelessness. So what about youth homelessness in Northfield? This is that stat that I was talking about earlier that I don't think is close to accurate. In 2023, the Northfield School District identified 9 students as experiencing homelessness. What we know to be true at the Key is that there are more youth than that, but they, whether it be shame, whether it be trauma, whether it's just survival, they're not sharing their story and they're not reaching out for resources. So that's one of our jobs, is to be the trusted adults in the safe space that they can come to so that we do find out and we can help provide resources. Rural communities like Northfield face unique challenges, including limited access to shelters and youth-specific services. There is not a youth-specific shelter in all of Rice County. Youth under 18 often cannot independently access county and state resources. There's limited options, and we know that foster care placements for teenagers are scarce in Rice County. So I'm going to share some of our data, and it goes back to the work we do at the Key is directly related to youth homelessness and reaching those kids that need the support. In 2024, the Key saw 428 youth over 7,900 times. We had one-on-one connections and conversations with 296 of those youth. In 2024, 100% of the youth who took the Survey of Academic and Youth Outcomes, we call it the SAO, stated that there is an adult at the Key they can talk to when they're upset. So we're providing safe, supportive adults in an inclusive safe space for these youth to come to. 16 youth utilized housing support at NUI, and we're providing 352 nights of safe shelter in 2024. 86 youth accessed mental health resources, as Scott said. It's not a silo. If you're dealing with homelessness, more than likely, you're going to need some mental health support. So this is our team that is showing up every day. Adam Willie is our housing coordinator. He works directly one-on-one with the youth. He develops goal plans weekly. He ensures essential needs are met. He's building that trusting relationship. He's really supporting these youth on their journey towards stability. Trinity Blowers is our longtime art coordinator, but she's currently in her social work program. So she's doing an internship as a housing program intern over at the Wallflower House. She's meeting weekly to facilitate residential meetings, and she's teaching life skills classes. She's meeting with each youth independently to see what skills they want to learn. Right now we've got a kiddo that's wanting to learn to budget and be able to cook meals, and just doing great things over there. Gabby is also a graduate student in her social work program. She's our mental health coordinator. She develops and leads weekly mental health programming, providing youth with valuable tools for emotional well-being. And then Natalie Morales is the newest person to our team. She's our youth center coordinator. She oversees daily operations at the Key, ensuring it's stocked and the staff needs are met. She's really a fierce advocate. She creates a really safe and supportive space for the youth. And then there's me. I fight for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's really important that youth have a voice and access to the support they need. We couldn't do the work that we do without community partners. Again, I think Scott spoke to this, and I do realize that some of these logos are outdated. And I'm hoping I didn't leave anyone off the slide, but the work that we do at the Key and NUI is really in partnership with the community that you see here. The City of Northfield supports both the Wallflower Project and the Wallflower House. HCI is our backbone support. They make sure that we have accurate data. Health Finders is our go-to for family planning supplies. If we have a kiddo that's dealing with some substance use things, the referrals over to Health Finder. Every youth that's in our housing program, Wallflower Project or Wallflower House, gets registered at the CAC so they can access the food shelf. They meet with a community navigator for SNAP benefits if they need insurance. We're funded by Wings and Northfield Shares and Rotary. We have the faith community that shows up with meals every week to make sure these kiddos are getting fed. Rice County Mental Health meet monthly with a mental health consultant. They meet with the kids that need mental health referrals. So it's really what we do at NUI is so much in partnership with so many organizations here in Northfield. I'm just really grateful for that inclusive spirit that this town has. So how can you support youth homelessness? Again, there's a QR code that will actually take you to our website. Contribute financially to any of the organizations on that previous slide. Volunteer, if you're interested in becoming a host home, want to learn more about what that's about, you can email housing@unionofyouth.org. Advocate, help shift perceptions, not just about youth homelessness, but about NUI and what we do and those kids, right? Advocate for youth, share impact stories. We're always accepting donations, food, toiletries, clothing. And visit our website, contact us. I'll be around for the Q&A afterwards. This is our contact information. I'm sure most of y'all know where the key is. It's on 6th Street between Paisley Gardens and Carboni's. Our mailing address is P.O. Box. We don't get mail at the key. Our website, that 507-219 number is actually my cell phone. It's my direct line. So if you have any questions, want to have any conversations around housing, you can reach out to me directly, as well as my email address, and again, the housing email address. So, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. By the end of the day tomorrow, I do hope to have all these PowerPoint presentations and the video from tonight's meeting, along with the contact information. So if you don't get an opportunity to scan the QR codes tonight, you can go on the Rice County website and find those. We will also have the PowerPoint and video from our housing presentation, which was in, I think it was November. And then look for our next presentation, I'm hoping in May, which will be on how our community corrections and correctional staff at our jail work with people who are on probation and people who are detainees at the jail, and help them get the supports that they need and navigate through the system, and so we can reduce recidivism. But I'm going to let Commissioner Malika finish up.
Yeah, we'll do, so maybe everybody represented, if you can come stand up here, so if there is a question, you can be right here by the microphone. In the meantime, Jenny Larson, Three Rivers, Executive Director, is here with us today. And Sarah Folstead, Rice County Administrators, in the back of the room. We have some Habitat for Humanity people here. Okay, great. And then I think Northfield HRA, Melissa, you're back there. And the Faribault Director, and Tom, I can't remember his last name, he left. Yeah, perfect. So, great.
I do want to thank the folks at Carleton, especially Cinda Nichols and Sydney, for helping us get this all set up.
So with that, questions of anybody about today's presentation or something that you might not have been presented? Okay.
So many great programs, and what you're doing is, I want to thank you all. I visited Hillcrest, did a tour of Hillcrest Village. It's just amazing. So there's so many good things going on, but I'm going to add one more complication to a complicated topic and say my work took me into many homes around the county over the years, especially in Faribault. And it's great that people, every place I was, there was a roof over people's heads, but not all those apartments are safe either, and especially for families. And you don't want to improve those places so much that they can't be affordable to people, but You know, I'm just thinking of one child I knew, a preschooler, who had many challenges already, and then her lead levels were found to be high because of where she was living. And so I don't know what an answer to that, but just a comment that that's yet one more complication is people living in inadequate and unsafe apartments.
So again, I'm Joy Watson, I'm the Director of Housing for Rice County, and so one of the things I can talk to your point, is if people are living either in the city of Northfield or the city of Faribault, each of those cities has a rental licensing ordinance, rental licensing enforcement. So if there are situations where someone is living in housing that may be less than ideal, each of the two larger cities in the county have an option to be able to reach out and have some enforcement from the city in that regard. So if you do know of that situation, I would really encourage you to reach out to your respective cities about that.
So for the nonprofits, how are you going to be affected by some of the issues that are occurring in Washington with federal funding?
I'll start and pass it down. When the initial executive order with the federal funding came out, I believe it's been rescinded, but one of our grants funds almost a quarter of our budget. And it's not completely federally funded, but it's federally funded partially. And so, yeah, there's concerns. And obviously what NUI stands for is everything diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we don't have any intention of scrubbing that from our grant applications or hiding anything of what we do and who we serve. So funding going forward is definitely a concern. And with that said, I believe in this community. I believe that there's other funding sources, and I'm ready to stand guard and protect our kids and protect our organization and protect our funding.
Yeah, I'm Laura Helly with Three Rivers Community Action. I'm tempted to pass the mic to my boss, Jenny, but what I'll say is at Three Rivers, we haven't felt any actual impacts. We're anticipating, we're watching. We do get a lot of federal funding in almost every program area that we run, including in housing. I would just say it's key to your community. It's feeding people, it's keeping people housed, it's teaching little kids. It's not fraud, waste, and abuse. It is actually impacting our communities, and it's necessary.
Yeah, and I'll just say for our program on homeownership, much of it is through private actors and state funding. We have some HUD funding, but it hasn't yet affected us. And yeah, I mean, I agree that these cuts are affecting the most underserved folks. So.
We can talk after privately too, but for less filters. But I think the reality is just there's the short-term issue, which we can all kind of debate about like how it's going to affect us. But at the end of the day, state, federal, or whatever, I mean, at some point, if there's a lot less money in the coffers, there's a lot less money to give out. And so if this, even though we may not have programs that are as federally funded, the reality of less federal funding at the state level will impact things. Our most immediate impacts have been like an absolute removal of funding for the open opportunities around Violence Against Women Act funding and just like decimating domestic violence work. And then our concern is really about some long-term housing construction opportunities and development opportunities that we were aligned with, but again, more to come, not a lot known now.
And we will hear from Jenny Larson with Three Rivers.
So at Three Rivers, about a third of our funding comes in some way from the federal government, either passed through the states or directly from the federal government in a lot of different program areas. I will say that we, as many other nonprofits and local community members, are concerned about some of the rhetoric that's happening around the funding, and it's really unfortunate that programs like assistance to prevent homelessness are at the top of the list for cuts rather than at the very last thing. So we're paying attention to it. I will say that we're fortunate in Minnesota that our state legislature has a lot of great programs as well. And I'm going to just encourage everybody in this room, if you care about this issue, if you care about housing, if you care about all of the supportive work that we do as nonprofits in your communities, call your elected officials, call your state reps, call your senators, call your member of Congress, call your senators. It's really important that they hear that we all care about these issues before we face the cuts. Let's make some noise now.
Thank you. And Sarah, Paul said that in this sort of Rice County, it affects the county and the cities as well on federal funding.
Sure. When the order first came out about some of the federal funding being paused or on hold, we did get like an early afternoon email that said essentially by 4 p.m. that they would no longer have access to reimbursement. So I emailed our departments and I went in the door-to-door for a short period of time and said submit for anything that you have that we can reasonably and say that we have this expense. And they went and did that. I had one department that submitted at like 4:39 and they were cut off. Oh boy. But the judge reversed it. The next morning they went in and they were able to get their funds. So we're really just being diligent and trying to submit for reimbursement if we're able to more frequently than we normally are. Sometimes we can only do quarterly, sometimes, we're limited to that, but if we're able, so that way if this happens again, we've at least gotten as much funding as we're able. But we have grants across departments. We have our victim services funded federally. Some of our newer programs with community corrections that have to do with some of behavioral health and some of the things we're able to do with different programming and supportive stuff is federal funds, federal grants. Housing HUD so far has been okay, but we've all seen the news on that. We've just been really watching to make sure that the money hits our bank account before we're putting the checks out, which is kind of not a normal practice, but we're doing that to make sure there are some protections in place if the federal government doesn't send the money to us, that there's protections for the resident or the person using the voucher for a period of time. Social services, public health, we have some federal funds, so there are just kind of across the county impacts us, and we're really watching to see what our risk and exposure is and what that means for what we do going forward.
This has nothing to do with all this whole conversation. I mean, what you all just said, thank you very much for that. But my name is Carrie. I'm the director of our community foundation, Northfield Shares. I had the opportunity to go to a conference last year, and I was just curious if there are statistics in the Rice County area about aging in place. The U of M Extension offices statewide, they said like 58% of folks ages 67 to 80 plus are currently in their homes, whereas 25, 30 years ago, they would not be in their homes. So if you think about, so this is a good news, bad news, as I would put it. We have a very active, healthy retirement community here, but we also have a very active, healthy retirement community that are still in their homes and able to be in their homes, which then I would say kicks us on the backside because you don't have that FHA, the first homeowner, So it's that cyclical thing, so it's a good news, bad news, I guess, but I was wondering if there are stats or if we thought about this area, specifically Rice County, from that perspective.
Do you have any thoughts, Megan? We've seen the statistics, I just don't have them in my head.
I wouldn't have them in my head, but we could get them. Yep.
Yeah, we can get Joy. Okay, Joy.
I actually have a thought on this because one of the things I deal with are elderly waivers and people who, age in place in homes. And of course, when we talk about the cycle not being linear, sometimes it might be a bell curve where you are going from being needy at the front end of life, like you're talking about needs of youth. Maybe you get into a home in the middle part of life, and then when you become elderly, you're in need again because you're aging. You have more needs because you're declining in your health. Yes, it is great that people are aging in place. The downside of that is, at some point, those faculties then, you know, as you become older, then it becomes less likely to age in place. And then those people are needing assisted living, they're needing nursing homes. And part of the issue that we're running into, when I had one of my slides up, our consolidation of assisted living. So part of aging in place is a bit of a necessity. There's not as many places to put people. So some people are kind of forced to age in place. Part of it is, I mean, some have higher incomes where they can, but then when they run out of income, what do they do with that? So you're right, it is a robust, it's great that they are aging in place, but then what do you do when you run out of that income? What do you do when those places aren't available? A big issue during COVID was not being able to keep nursing home staff and assisted living staff. And then those places closed down. I hope I'm addressing your issue. If I'm not, please let me know.
So, some of the things in, you know, in Northfield, 3 Links merged with another nursing home group. Northfield Retirement Center just merged with another nursing home group. Northfield Hospital closed their units. A lot of people are actually having to go out of town to be in a nursing home because we don't have the space here in Northfield. In those, you know, the 3 Links or Northfield Retirement Center. Yes, we're seeing more and more people try to age in place since COVID. COVID was a complete disaster on people who had families in nursing homes. It was a struggle for the family and the person that was in the nursing home. But we're seeing the uptick. We now have more, and this is nationwide, not just Bryce County. Since 2007, the birth rate's been down, so now we have more people turning 65 and older than we have kids being born. So we're going to be top heavy on the 65 plus. And so, yes, people are trying to stay in their homes longer. You know, thank you for 50 North and Buckham West and Faribault to offer programming and offer exercise programs and so on and so forth for the 50 on up, so they can stay in their homes longer. So those are 2 good partners of ours that Bryce County work with. I don't know, did we answer? You've got a little bit more?
No, I was just saying from, well, how do I say this?
What you were saying.
Here, you do this.
I went to the same conference.
Yeah.
What they were saying essentially is that with the folks aging in place, you have what people used to think of as workforce housing being kept away from the workforce by these folks, as somebody mentioned earlier, who had a 4-bedroom house and had 3 kids, but now the kids are gone. They're still in that house. Workforce can't move in because that house is being used. And additionally, the people who are living there aren't able to keep it up as well as they used to, and they don't take advantage then of some of the programs that are available for older homeowners who could be doing improvements that are reduced in cost. So the housing is being kept away from the workforce, and the houses aren't being kept up as well.
Thank you. What she said.
I'll add just one more wrinkle to that, which is there's a national trend where the size of households is going down. So where 50 years ago it was a married couple, now it's 2 single adults living on their own. And so almost every demographic trend is working against our existing housing stock to be able to serve the community, and the cost of constructing more is super high. It's a little bit of a perfect storm situation.
And then can I add an and to that? So yes, the city is very aware of what's going on in this housing sphere with folks staying in their homes and aging in place, which then creates a lack of a churn. We don't have a churn anymore in our market. And we're trying to address that a little bit through our comp plan and also through our land development code. We're hoping to also address some issues that we've identified that have been barriers to the creation of ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and being able to take advantage of our very progressive land development code right now that allows 3 units of housing on one lot, right? So we want to try to take advantage of that. And then also on a side note, how the federal cuts are going to affect the city, at least for the HRA. We receive community development block grant funds through Dakota County. And Joy and I were at a housing conference last week, and we were pretty much told that if we're trying to budget from fiscal year 2025, which is July 1, to not even count on that money. So on that side, the city is also getting statewide affordable housing aid, which we started getting last year, and unfortunately we are at a net zero. And I was really excited because I was thinking we have more money for programs, and we really don't. So.
Mike had a question up here.
Thanks, Galen. Mike Thorstensen, Northfield. One of the most important programs that we've got in the country, to me, is Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. And those are really on the chopping block, and they're a key piece for getting people out of poverty. And already it's a struggle for people to get health care. And if we cut that out, it's going to be that much worse. So whatever you can do to call congressional people and put pressure on folks to try to minimize those cuts, it's pretty important. And then secondly, this year's federal budget technically runs out March 14th of this year. So hopefully we're not going to have another government shutdown. But I don't know what else people are hearing, but I'm hearing that the potential for a government shutdown is pretty severe right now.
One of the things we've been hearing are putting work requirements on the Affordable Care Act and on medical assistance, similar to what you see in the food support program. So in other words, you have to be employed or looking for work, which has been in the SNAP program for now almost 30 years. And we are expecting increases in the income levels. We are expecting cuts in medical assistance. And I mean, we are expecting cuts in other public assistance programs as well. But to your point, we have heard some of that as well on our end. Thank you for bringing that up.
I'm wondering if any of you are following trends in intergenerational housing. We live in this town that has 2 colleges with lots of young people. Our enrollment rates are going down with population changes. I know St. Olaf is trying this right now with having older folks and college students living in the same housing. So it seems like that is one opportunity, and I'm curious at the conferences that you all are going to, if you see that as a trend line on colleges and universities.
Anybody want to take a stab at that? Jenny Larson or anybody out in the audience?
Just a small amount. I mean, I know there are in Olmsted County, the First Homes Land Trust there is building, I think it's like starting with 3 and going up to 11 intergenerational homes. I know that there are a couple of apps that are almost like dating sites where you can line up someone who's a single older adult that has a home with college students so that they can not always rent, but trade services like cooking, cleaning, odd jobs around the house, that sort of thing as well. So it is becoming a little bit more common.
I would say just in my own family right now, my 22-year-old niece lives with my mother. Kind of for that same reason that, my mom lives just a few blocks from my sister, but maybe needs a little help during the day, and so my niece cannot afford to rent on her own, and so that's kind of the best of both worlds for our family, and I think you'll see more of that, whether they be a family or as you mentioned, the apps, things like that, because, you know, for especially those younger people that are in the room, finding affordable housing is getting more difficult. You had mentioned in the back with the aging in place, that's one of the big issues is that older people have a home, the home is maybe paid for, but they're to the point where they can't clean the gutters, they can't mow the yard. And so it's kind of solves two problems at once. So I think we will probably see more of that.
Okay, it is 8. We will take a few more questions. If not, you can come up front and ask questions individually if you wish to. Once again, thank you. Anybody who has questions? All right, thank you, Cinda and Sydney, and thank you, Carleton College, for hosting us. We really appreciate that. And thank you, Susie, for putting this together. Thank you to our nonprofits and Habitat and Northwood HRA, Faribault HRA, et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully you learned something. It's a continual process because you have in development, you have market-driven, the private developers, and then you have the programming end of what we're all trying to do to help development for people of certain income levels and so on and so forth. So with that, thank you. I hope you learned something. We will be having a couple more. We're going to do the community corrections one at some point, but we're also going to redo, we had a mental health one, we're going to redo that as well. Whether that is the next one and community corrections goes to springtime, or that goes to springtime and community corrections, or fall time. So, all right, thank you everybody. Appreciate you coming out tonight. Hope it was informational.